practice. A couple of words to avoid, really simple little words that come into conversation an awful lot. The first is should. I can't think of many positive or constructive uses for that word. We tend to use it either berating ourselves or berating other people. I shouldn't have done that. I should do this. I should lose weight. I should be better. I should have passed that test. Or you should go on that course. You should do this. It isn't a particularly positive form of speaking. And if we are using it a lot, I would just suggest maybe alarm bells might ring and we might consider other alternative formulations.
Welcome to the Traveling Cup Podcast, connecting you to copy-loving entrepreneurs, writers, and think tanks building a better tomorrow. Now here's your host, Mark William Guay.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Traveling Cup Podcast. This is the virtual coffee shop dedicated to helping fuel your purpose-driven life and just have tremendous impact in your work. The show interviews game changers, writers, and think tanks to help you be a change maker. On the call with me today to talk about how to speak and listen effectively is none other than Julian Treasure, the leading researcher and expert on effective communication. Now, Julian has spoken at TED more than a handful of times, and he travels the world to teach high-ranking CEOs and innovators from all these different sectors how to communicate and connect through what he calls conscious listening and speaking. The audio can get a bit rocky at times, but stay with it. There's so much in this episode that you will definitely have to have a second or a third listen. The funny thing is that Julian and I, we share effective strategies for speaking and listening while we are both in the medium of speaking and listening. So I tried my best to be A-game material. You'll notice that I ramble on for a little bit because, well, heck, I'm nervous. It's funny. Check it out. I love what Julian has to share because it not only can help us all be better communicators at work, but also just better spouses and friends to our lifelong partners. My wife and I often talk about this too because we want to have a relationship that's just as strong as ever. And on that note, just an FYI, I'll be at the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York in just a few weeks in September of 2014 to meet with others about building meaningful conversations between men and women and how to hack through the confines, the gender constructs that society often likes to place on people. And well, just it teaches us to be the best people that we can be. If that's something that interests you, please reach out to me and I'll tell you more. On the call, Julian and I, we talk about vocal warm-ups, the voice as an instrument, conscious listening and speaking, and empowering relationships. You can connect with Julian at juliantreasure.com or on Twitter at Julian Treasure. That's JulianTreasure. Of course, all the information is over there at thetravelingcup.com. If you're not signed up yet for the podcast, please make sure to subscribe to the show over at thetravelingcup.com and let me know what you think. I'd love to hear from you and see what I can do to better make a place for you to do great work that matters. So send me a tweet at Mark W. Guay. Here we go. So let's have a little fun here. Let's do let's do a vocal warm-up. Julian, you were talking that there is a vocal warm-up called the Siren, correct?
Yeah, it's the one that I will use. If I can only do one, I'll go to a toilet somewhere and do this one because it really does release the full range of your voice very quickly.
Okay, great. Let's start off our conversation here with that one. So how does this work? Let's do it together.
Okay. Well, you make two sounds. The first sound is we, and the second sound is or. And you start with the we very high, the highest you can do, and then you swoop down and do the or, the lowest you can do. So it's kind of like a sine wave. So if I give you a demonstration, it goes like that.
All right, I'm going to give it my best shot here. Here we go. How was that?
That's pretty good. And if you notice any discontinuities, that's a place to work and just keep it going until you really have a smooth transition all the way down. Sometimes I notice a break where I'm not vocalizing a particular frequency. Sometimes I notice the range isn't huge. It's kind of like exercising muscles. So it's a really good one to do. People think you're crazy, but never mind, because it'll make your voice that much more powerful. when you're speaking.
I love that. So, and you said you go to the toilet to do that.
Generally, yes, unless I can find a quiet room with nobody in it.
All right, fantastic. Well, thanks so much. I feel warmed up now. I'm ready to rock and roll. All right. So Julian, just thanks so much for joining us on our virtual coffee shop here at the Traveling Cup podcast. I mean, I'm just really excited to chat with you about powerful speaking, listening for health, wealth, and relationships. But before we do that, let's just get to know you just a little bit better. And just by the way, where are you tuning in from today?
Well, I'm in the UK, just southwest of London, in a county called Surrey. It's a beautiful, warm, sunny English summer's day today.
Lovely, lovely. Well, hello from New York City. All right, Julian, can you share a memory of the last great conversation that you had over a cup of coffee or tea?
Yeah, I can actually. I love coffee. I hand grind. I use a Japanese stainless steel hand grinder, and I use an AeroPress at home, and I buy my coffee from a wonderful place called Has Been Coffee, which is a sort of micro roastery, well, boutique roastery. So I'm very serious about coffee. And the last one was with my wonderful fiance Jane. Actually, just this morning we shared a nice cup of coffee, and we were talking about the importance of laughter in relationships, and how fortunate we feel that we do a lot of laughing. And I was actually saying to her, I think it's almost the most important thing to me to laugh together.
I love that. You know what? I'm gonna after this conversation, I'm gonna bring that into my morning conversation with my wife. We talk about laughing a lot too. We actually do something called laughing yoga once in a while, which is a really goofy way of that. Yeah, it's great. It's great. Well, you're at the right place. Talking with other coffee lovers here. AeroPress is one of my favorite, especially when I travel.
Definitely.
So Julian, what book are you currently reading?
I'm reading an amazing book called Listening, Thinking, Being. It's by a woman called Lisbeth Lipari, presumably of Italian descent. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of about the ethics of listening. And, if you've seen my TED Talks, I'm very serious about listening, conscious listening.
Yes.
She has a very interesting take about listening as an ethical undertaking. So it's somewhere between philosophy and practical advice. Very good.
So I need to check that out. Excellent. What was the title again?
Listening, Thinking, Being.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And Julian, you've been a big influence on me. I've loved your TED Talk since I first saw it. And then, of course, you're welcome. The others after that as well. And in all my walks of life, I've tried really hard to be a really good listener and also an effective orator and speaker. But who has been an influence on you?
Well, I can think of two people particularly in the field of music, Brian Eno, and more than just music, the field of kind of considering sound intellectually, really thinking about sound. Is a great thinker about sound. A lot of musicians do it instinctively. He does it very rationally and consciously. And then in terms of writing, there's a guy called Joachim Ernst Berendt, who was a great jazz player and also organizer of many, many jazz festivals, in addition to which he wrote some wonderful books. There's one called Nada Brahma, The World is Sound, which I deeply love. It's controversial, it's stimulating, it's challenging. It's a wonderful book about the power of sound in our world.
Well, I know we're going to talk a little bit more about the power of sound in our world here. But you bring up the topic of writing, and I know you do quite a bit of writing as well. And we have a lot of writers here who tune into the show, myself included. So just curious, what helps you most with your writing?
Patience. Just patience. I'm not naturally patient. I find the whole process of rewriting and editing quite painful. I like the writing stuff, and I always have a lot of fun. I sit there with my fingers moving and constantly think, I didn't know I knew that. And stuff comes out. The process of rewriting and chipping away and burnishing the little edges and so forth, that requires a lot of patience. Plus some software. There's a piece of software I use on a Mac called DevonSync, which is a very useful intelligent database, which has helped me a lot to connect things I wouldn't otherwise have connected. So those two things, I think.
So this is interesting then that you talk about the frustration of writing, and I think a lot of the listeners have a lot of frustration with speaking. And so, really, a lot of our listeners today have a serious message that they really want to get out to the world, but in reality, no one seems to be listening, especially in the super noisy world that we live in, particularly with social media. So this is a large question here, and we'll narrow it down after we talk more about it. But how do we get people to listen with hopefully 100% attention?
Well, I think the first thing is to listen to them. If you listen to people, they will return the favor. You create an atmosphere of listening, I think. We can talk about listening later. In terms of actually speaking, then the old song comes into play where it is what you say and the way that you say it. So it's important to think about the content. And in my TED Talk recently, which, I'm amazed by the response to that one. It's gone through 1.7 million views in like a month. My first talk took, I think, a year to get to 1 million views. So that's really blown me away. What I talk about is some things to avoid, like I talk about 7 sins of speaking. And, we can talk about those in a moment. But they all come from a fear, which expresses itself in certain key things that underlie people's speaking. And this is underlying the speaking that's difficult to listen to. So this is stuff to avoid. You know what I mean? Things like looking good. If you're standing on a stage worrying about how you look and how people are perceiving you, that's not the right place to come from. And being right is even worse. It's an obsession we have in the West, particularly, an addiction to being right. And again, if you're speaking from a place of being right about everything, you're pretty hard to listen to. Fixing things, making it all right for everybody all the time, not having it okay for anybody to be upset around you. And people pleasing, of course, which is not saying what you mean, just saying what you think people want to hear. Those are all fear-based, those 4 things. I call them the 4 leeches of speaking power. And they tend to give rise to these 7 sins. The opposite, if we turn the coin over from what not to do, and we can come back to the 7 sins whenever you like, and we talk about what to do in terms of content, then the mnemonic I came up with in that TED Talk, which I passionately believe in, is HAIL, which stands for honesty. That is to say, saying what you mean, being clear, being straight. Authenticity, which is being yourself, not pretending to be anybody else, unless you're an actor, of course, or you're putting on a persona for a reason, but not altering yourself to go on stage and be some sort of other version. Integrity, which is walking the walk. It's doing what you say. If you say something, you do something. And the L is love, which may surprise some people. And I'm not talking about romantic, affection. I'm talking here about wishing people well. Because when you come on stage, actually, it's not about you. It's about them. And that's always the case. Whether you're talking about an internet communication, one-to-one communication, as we're having now, it's not about me. It's about getting a message across. It's about caring about the people who are listening. And in this case, you. So HAIL, very important. And then that's what you say. The whole other area is how you say it. And I went through really fast in that TED Talk what I call the vocal toolbox, which includes all these amazing things like pitch, how high your voice is or how low it is, register where you speak from, whether it's falsetto up there or whether it's really deep in the chest down here. Timbre, the actual feel of your voice. Is it thin or is it rich? Pace, how fast you're going, how slow. Prosody, which is the wonderful sing-song that we use when we're speaking, and volume. All of those things are tools that we can use to get our message across. Most people have never really actively considered them because so few of us ever consider the voice as an instrument. It's the instrument we all play, and almost none of us are ever given any training.
So, you know what? Let's take a second and really dive into that because my heart is going there right now. And I love with what you're saying and as far as the voice as an instrument that we never really learn how to play. And I have this funny image of everyone getting a guitar and never really learning how to play it. But that's not the case. You choose to get a guitar. With the voice, it's something that we're born with. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that. And I know we can't get as specific as we probably could over 25 cups of coffee and 25 different conversations. But in short, how would one best learn their instrument? Obviously, you can do a vocal coach, but where else would people be able to go to really tune in their instrument?
Well, I love doing training in this. I have some trainings on Udemy. I don't know if you've come across the Udemy platform, but
I did. Yep, I love it.
I have like a 2-hour training course on voice where I go through some of these things in more detail. Obviously, if it's something like timbre that's a problem, then you may need to go and see a vocal coach, and they're really good people. Whether it's a singing coach or an acting coach, they'll help you with timbre. That'll be about the posture. It'll be about the breath. Mm-hmm. It'll be about the muscles. It'll be about the throat constriction, and that can be worked on. So that can be greatly solved. With pitch and register and prosody, then that's much more a question of becoming conscious about it. And I have a range of exercises which I do in that Udemy course, mm-hmm. which will help that. But the key to it is to become conscious that you're playing this instrument all the time, and to start listening to yourself and to start playing with slowing down. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a bit of silence. We don't have to go the whole time. And it gives more weight to things. Or you can get really excited. You can speed up, So consciously playing with that, playing with your intonation, your prosody, that's really opening the door to the whole wonderful world. There are books on it. There are courses on it as well as mine. There are people who can teach. It's such a rich and wonderful area to get into. And really, anybody who's listening to this who has to speak in any meaningful way, whether it's persuading your children not to go out to that nightclub where, bad things happen, or whether it's asking for a raise at work, or whether it's selling a book to a publisher, or whether it's standing on a stage in front of 10 people or 10,000 people, you owe it to yourself to become a master of this amazing instrument.
So I'm curious, I often talk about the human as being the storytelling animal, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, particularly with how once you learn how to manipulate your voice as an instrument, how it can, really truly affect and influence your audience.
Well, obviously, this all has to be framed with some moral underpinning. One of the two of the people, it was quite interesting actually, one of the two of the people who commented on my TED Talk were concerned about giving everybody the power to influence with the voice without that moral underpinning. And Hitler was mentioned, for example, who, right. We don't want people like that going around persuading people to follow them. Well, the answer is that the vocal skills, I hope, are going to be used a lot more by good people, because I do believe there are a lot more good people in the world than evil people in the world. And it's important for all of us, if we're working in charity or we're doing good things, that we have this strength, this ability to be persuasive and strong. So I think we all owe it to ourselves to learn how to use the voice. I mean, it's crazy not to. It's a God-given instrument. As you said, we're all born with it. And it just seems crazy to me that in schools, we focus on only 2 of our 4 main communication protocols. We've got reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And in schools, we obsess about reading and writing. We barely teach speaking, and we absolutely do not teach listening.
That's so interesting that you say that. So just quick question then. What advice would you give to those that are in the education space on how to teach speaking and listening? Would you refer them to the didactic courses like your Udemy course and other books and such like that? Or are there any other activities that you can think of?
Well, I think make it fun. I'm actually working on a syllabus for teaching young kids listening skills, and you can really make it fun. Have games. Send them out to listen to their environment and write about what they hear, play games in the classroom with speaking, mm-hmm. speaking fast, speaking slow, speaking high, speaking low, and just explore all of the corners of the voice so that they start to realize they've actually got all of this power, and it's not just a thing they use all the time. So I hope that would defray. For example, there's a very repetitive intonation which has come from Australia originally, and then via the west coast of the US through a lot of children's TV. Has become enormously prevalent across the world. Even my daughter does it in the UK. which is called high rising terminal, where every sentence is ended as if it were a question. You may have come across this, and it's rather repetitive.
So that's interesting because, actually, Julian, I used to take acting classes. That's where I originally came from, and my acting coach used to tell us to do that. Used to try to, when you were on stage, end on a high, as if you were not so much asking a question, but very similar to as if you were asking a question, and that would be. She had argued that it would be a way to captivate your audience. Now, we didn't really necessarily understand that at the point, so it's interesting that you're kind of arguing against that.
I think a statement has a particular intonation that's valuable to have, and that does tend to involve going down at the end.
Right.
But, these are conventions, and I'm not being prescriptive here. Everybody's different.
Right.
All I would say is that if you have exactly the same intonation in every sentence, then you're robbing yourself of flexibility and freedom. And there's so much we can do with prosody. It doesn't have to go one way or another. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing to play with. And I think if you get stuck in questioning intonation, it's also rather weak, because effectively what I'm doing at the end of every sentence is asking you for your approval. I mean, there's a kind of elision there of me saying something, and then it's the unspoken bit is, do you agree? Or is that okay? Or what do you think? And that kind of is an unsaid, slightly weak question. So if you want to speak with power, I would certainly tend to avoid that particular prosody.
That's so interesting. I have to admit, I never thought of it on that level of deconstruction right there, but that's just so powerful to me, specifically with all the work that we're seeing out there now that talks about having confidence in yourself and not allowing fear to hold you back. And so it's almost as if when you end on a high note, like you were just saying, it's asking someone else for permission, and therefore it's allowing you not to take control of your actions.
I'll give you a couple of other little ones that listeners can maybe take away and practice.
Great.
A couple of words to avoid. Really simple little words that come into conversation an awful lot. The first is should. I can't think of many positive or constructive uses for that word. We tend to use it either berating ourselves or berating other people. I shouldn't have done that. I should do this. I should lose weight. I should be better. I should have passed that test. Or you should go on that course. You should do this. It isn't a particularly positive form of speaking. And if we are using it a lot, I would just suggest maybe alarm bells might ring and we might consider other alternative formulations. The other one's a pernicious little word, which has some wonderful uses, just. Now, I'm not talking about it as in fair, honest, appropriate, and so forth. I'm talking about it as a minimizer, as a word that we tend to use to make things smaller. I'm just going to have one, for example, but it's amazing how often it comes into conversation, even when we're on stage in front of a lot of people. I just want to start by saying, Now, if you contrast that with, I want to start by saying, one of them is apologetic, the other one is not. So it's a very good word to look out for in your speech. Maybe ask a friend to notice if you say it, because these things can become unconscious habits. And just ask yourself, there you are, it dropped in there. Ask yourself, is it actually adding to your clarity, or is it you apologizing or trying to minimize things when actually they need to be said plainly?
So that's very similar then to when people start off a sentence and say something like, needless to say, ...
Yes, well, if it's needless to say, then one wonders why it's being said. So.
Right. Okay, so just real quick before we jump into conscious listening, you referenced Hitler as an extremely effective orator, but obviously someone that we do not want other people to replicate because of his benevolent principles. But who is one of the best speakers out there today that you typically find yourself referencing when someone says, well, who's doing it right? I mean, obviously, I think you're an incredibly effective speaker, but who do you usually reference?
Well, I love Ken Robinson. I mean, I've had the honor and privilege of meeting Ken a couple of times at TED. And
great man.
He's as funny in the flesh as he is on the stage. And that's him. He's not putting anything on. That's just the way he is. If you sit and have a lunch with him, that's how he is. He's very funny. He's very intelligent, and he cares passionately. I'd also We think other people, Tony Robbins, I mean, he's overcome quite an interesting physical condition. I understand he has some sort of thyroid condition. He's a huge man. He has quite a croaky voice. But my goodness, when you look at that man on the stage, his gestures, his movement, the way he commands the stage, and his ability to express himself, absolutely extraordinary. The guy who taught me is an Australian guy called Dwayne Alley. He's a master of stage presence as well. So there's a lot of good people out there. You only have to look at TED for a while to see a lot of good habits of speakers.
Right. Well, I imagine too the inherent structure of in under 20 minutes or less, right, is probably forces people to be more effective speakers.
I think so. Yeah, it's a very interesting length.
So let's talk a little bit here about then conscious listening. Those are amazing tools that you were able to share with us on how to be an effective speaker. So then, how do we be an effective listener? I mean, well, first of all, let's just start off with the simple aspect here. What is conscious listening, and then how can we practice it?
Well, I define listening as making meaning from sound. So it's a different process from hearing. It's a mental process, purely mental. And largely it's a process of abstraction. We're surrounded by sensation the whole time. And our reality is what we extract from that massive sensation and what we pay attention to. So if listening is making meaning from sound, then conscious listening is consciously making meaning from sound. And that immediately becomes interesting because that's me acknowledging that I'm playing a part in the process, that I have a role in the meanings I make. And the moment I start to get with that idea, then that gives me the power to start intervening and to become conscious that I'm making those meanings, maybe change them if they're not helping me in my life.
That's interesting. So then I guess what are some of the bad habits that a lot of listeners tend to fall into?
Well, there are a lot of habits. I mean, the most important one is just being unconscious. And, I said reading, writing, speaking, listening. The research shows that we spend 60% or even more of our time actually listening. And yet the latest research I just saw out this week, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal piece, which mentioned me and various other people who care about this, was that we retain just 10% of what we hear in conversation.
Right.
So we're not particularly good at listening. And a lot of that's because we have bad habits. We don't pay attention. I had a little mnemonic. I did a TEDx talk in the Houses of Parliament recently, and the mnemonic I came up with, which is a cheerful little mnemonic. And it was a mnemonic around attention was extremely important. To actually being with somebody, giving people your attention is an amazing gift. There are millions of people, even billions on this planet, who've never had the experience of being listened to properly. And when you do that, you're not looking at a screen. You're not typing something. You're not cooking something. You're not doing something else. You're actually giving somebody your whole undivided, complete attention. Respect is part of the hurrah. Humility is part of the hurrah. So not thinking I'm right and thinking I'm better, but maybe I've got something to learn from this person, even if I don't like them or I don't understand them. So all of those things are in there. And the cocktail of giving somebody complete, humble attention is rare. So much of the time we will be, for example, speech writing, which is what I call the process of waiting for the inconvenient noise coming out of your mouth to stop so that I can come in with my next bon mot that I've been composing while you've been wittering on about whatever I don't really know. So that's not listening. That is definitely not listening. And nor is, paying attention to 3 or 4 streams of input, a screen, a phone, a TV set, a radio, music, and somebody talking.
Julian, what was the mnemonic again?
Hurrah. So it was humility, attention, respect, awareness, which is awareness of that I'm actually in this process. And that's the mnemonic.
And so is one of the main takeaways that perhaps listeners can do is perhaps repeat what someone says to them as a kinesthetic way to actively listen?
Yeah, in conversation, in my original TED talk on conscious listening, I had 5 practices that I recommended to people. 3 of them are very easy to do. A few minutes of silence a day, that's really good for you. It resets your ears. Savoring the sounds around you. So actually listening to amazing sounds like, turn on your kettle and put your ear quite close, not close to the spout, but close to the base. And you hear this beautiful sound. It's amazing. So there's a hidden choir in quite a lot of noises around us. The mixer, where you can sit in a complex sound environment like a cafe and disentangle all of the sounds around you, just to, work out how many voices you're hearing, where are they coming from, and so forth. And then listening positions, which is the idea of being able to change your filters. We all listen through a whole bunch of filters: our culture, our language, our morals and attitudes and beliefs and values that we assimilate along the way from role models. And of course, our intentions and expectations in any given situation where we come in, we may be expecting to achieve something or intending something. And they all affect the way we listen. So some people we just dismiss because they don't fit in with our worldview. Other people we revere and we listen to every word they say. And if you become conscious of the fact you're listening through filters, again, the key is consciousness. Then you have the opportunity to use them as kind of control surfaces and actually to change your reality. It's like coming out from a concrete bunker where you've been locked in your whole life and realizing that, that house on the hill you've been looking at from here the whole time, but if you go around the other side of the hill, it might look completely different. And you can do that with your listening. And then just coming back to what you were just saying, in conversation, I had another little mnemonic. I love mnemonics because I have a very poor memory.
You're very good at them. I'm very impressed by your ability to easily construct them.
Yeah, memory not being my strong point. So this one is about conversation. It's rasa, which is the Sanskrit word for juice, and it stands for receive, appreciate, summarize, ask. So receive is little noises like you've been doing to me on this call. Oh, really? That kind of little thing. Just showing you're still there. Appreciate. That's a very important one. Receive. No, receive is body language, which you can't do on the phone, which is looking at somebody and giving them your full attention. Appreciate is the little noises that you've been doing. Summarize is as you said, it's summarizing what somebody just said. So what you're saying is this. It's very, very good to recycle like that. And if you're a so person, you're very, very important in corporate life. Without a so person to gather, we've all agreed this. Now we can move on to the next thing. Without that going on, meetings can last a very, very long time. And then the A of Rasa is ask its questions. Now, there are lots of listening positions that we can adopt using these tools. And the one that you were particularly speaking about is normally called active listening or reflective listening, where you say something and I say something like, what I hear you say is ... and then I repeat what you just said, which is used in the therapeutic professions quite a lot. It's used in counseling, in teaching sometimes. It's a very, very effective way of communicating in those limited environments. I would suggest it may not be the best thing to do to your friends all the time because they'll start thinking you're a bit crazy and get pretty irritated with you. But it does definitely leave the other person feeling heard.
And I imagine, too, that it allows the person you're listening to register whether or not what they are saying is actually being understood.
Yes, definitely. There are some very, very good courses that I've taken over the years. I mean, I'm always experimenting with and exploring courses which are around this area. There's one called Imago, where they have a particular form of words which puts a kind of safe container around an argument. Instead of, pointing the finger and you did this and you really upset me, it's more, when you did this thing, I felt really upset. And then the other person says, okay, what I heard was, when I did this thing, you feel really upset. And you get some kind of back and forth which makes sense to both people. There's a validation, there's a neutral space where it's not communicated with anger. It can be about anger. But I think that's very good. There's other tools and techniques like the parent effectiveness training system. I've come across many of these things, and they generally all operate by raising your consciousness one notch. You're not in the anger. You're speaking about the anger, and you're conscious that that's what you're doing. So this is all about conscious speaking and conscious listening.
I love this. Julian, thank you so much. This has just been so helpful, I think, to us, especially to, I've had a lot of people on the show talk about mindfulness, and which is why I'm so happy to have you on the show, because I think this is an aspect of mindfulness that doesn't necessarily get as much voice as I feel like it really should. One last quick question, if I may, before you leave. So I love your point about not engaging in complaining, and this is something you've said several places before. Should someone give attention to negativity when things really are going poorly for someone, or just focus on the positive? And I guess to frame this could be in the personal life, in a relationship with your spouse, for instance, or your kids, but even more so in the professional workspace as well.
Well, I should be very clear that when I talk about the 7 deadly sins of speaking,
right,
which are gossip, judging, complaining, negativity, excuses, exaggeration, and dogmatism, I'm not saying don't do these things. So again, people misunderstood this under the TED Talk. There were some comments, and I didn't have to say anything, actually. Some of the other TEDsters came back and said, no, that's not what he meant,
right,
which is nice. I'm not saying don't complain. What I'm saying is, if you become a habitual complainer, if that's what comes out of your mouth most of the time, you become very hard to listen to. And if you want to speak in power, if you want to be a strong speaker and persuasive, you don't want to be standing on a stage complaining or, complaining to everybody in your life. It does, I call complaining viral misery. There are times when we all do it. Goodness, none of us are perfect. And there are times indeed when we need to complain, when something unjust has been done and we need to rise up and complain about it. So I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying if you do it all the time, just like being negative or being dogmatic, it's boring to be around people who thump the table and they're right the whole time and they won't listen to anybody. So if you want to speak in power, these are things which you might consider perhaps just asking yourself, do I have these habits? I mean, are they in my speaking? Could I just rein back on them? At least become conscious of them.
That's wonderful, and I'm so happy that that I then asked you that question, because I did see the commenters say that, and I had a feeling that's what you were getting at, and that's so important too, and of course that goes back to really the theme that you were talking about here today, which is really the power of building positive habits that drive your speaking and listening forward. So Julian, before we leave here, it's really important that we make sure that we're able to help you out, because you're helping us not just with your TED Talks, but with your Udemy courses and the other courses and all the free stuff that you have on your website too. I really appreciate that. So what can our listeners do to help you out?
Well, yes, please do pop by my website, which is juliantreasure.com, and explore the free content. I think we just asked for an email address in order to do that, and then there are courses. I do physical trainings as well in the UK. I haven't done them abroad yet, but we do those once every couple of months, and they're a full-day course. Spread the message. Go out, talk to people about being conscious, get them to watch the TED Talks, which are free, and they're only 8 minutes long or whatever. There's a Facebook group, Masters of Sound, which is fun, and there's some nice people in there. It's just a question of getting the message out there. I just love the idea of a world where everybody's listening consciously, because conscious listening is the doorway to understanding. It's really hard to depersonalize people if you're consciously listening. Apart from anything else, it's like turning up the color on a black and white TV set. It's a whole new dimension to listening. So if we do that, we'd be in a different world.
I want to make sure that we have that quote down, and I want to end with that quote because I think it's beautiful here. And I'm writing this down to make sure that I have it. I'm writing it on my whiteboard at the moment. Conscious listening is, what did you say?
The doorway to understanding.
Conscious listening is the doorway to understanding. Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. So, Julian, we have juliantreasure.com, I know is your website. Is there any other, what do you use to communicate? Are you on Twitter? Are you active on Twitter?
I am, yeah. I'm on Twitter. It's just Julian Treasure. And there's Facebook for me and also for my company, The Sound Agency, which is an audio branding company. We try and help companies to make better sound and to become conscious about the sound they're making. So I kind of work on two levels. At that level, the Sound Agency, which is thesoundagency.com, that's with companies. And then Julian Treasure julianwriting.com. That's with individuals, and just driving really this message of conscious listening, conscious speaking, conscious design of our environments as well for sound. It's all just really something I'm passionate about, and I'm convinced that it will make a huge contribution to the world if we move in that direction.
I am with you 110%. That's lovely. Julian, thank you so very much for tuning in from the UK today and sharing your wisdom with us. I love this aspect of mindfulness. I know I'm going to take these and practice them as well. And I can't wait to hear from our listeners at the Traveling Cup what they're going to do with this information as well. So Julian, thank you so much again. And when you do make it to New York City next, let me take you out for a really good cup of coffee.
That would be delightful, Mark. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
You're welcome, Julian. Take care. Cheers.
Bye-bye then.
This episode is brought to you by my good friends over at Bear in Motion Filmmaking, infusing the art of cinematic storytelling to produce high-quality artistic video, specializing in weddings, small business promotion, and documentaries. Find out more over at bearinmotion.com. That's BEARINMOTION.com. All right, okay, I'm going to try this one more time here. Oh, God, that sounds terrible. I love that one. And actually, you know what? Here's another vocal warm-up that I want to share with all my other friends out there who have dabbled into the acting world. This one takes me back to actually where I first met my wife. And hey, honey, do you mind joining me for this vocal warm-up here? Okay, here we go. You ready? Here we go. Many, many, ming, ming, what a pity, what, bippity, boppity, bippity, boppity, bippity, boppity, boo. Many, many, ming, ming, what a pity, what, bippity, boppity, bippity, boppity, bippity, boppity, boo. Okay, and you keep on repeating that as many times as you would like. Go ahead, give it a shot. No one's listening. All right, my friends, cheers to you, and thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you got as much out of that episode as I did, and I'd love to hear what you think and what you are working on. So share your thoughts with me over at Twitter at MarkWguay. That's Mark W. Guay, or over at thetravelingcup.com. If you know someone who you'd love for me to have on the show, just let me know. Remember, the show is not about me. It's about you. Cheers.